Let's go into a deep dive. Now, this is one of the things that I like to do on my own time, and I thought I would share it with you. Let's just call this who you really are. Who are you really? Ask yourself, who am I? What am I? Who am I really? Really, really? If you didn't have what makes you who you are, who are you then? If you didn't have the family that you have, if you didn't have the past that you have, if you didn't have the clothes that you usually wear, if you didn't have the hair that you have, if you didn't have the job that you have, if you didn't have the childhood that you had, all of these things that make you who you are today, if all of those were to be removed, if they were erased, if you lost them, let's say you got into an accident and all of the identity that you associate with no longer valid. You wake up one day and you don't remember your name. You don't remember your birth date. You don't remember who you are, your family name. You don't remember your age. You don't remember anything that would let you know who you are. What are you behind that veil? That thing that makes you who you are. What is that? Because all the things that we identify with are physical. It can be even emotional. It's nothing close to our spirit. Now, our spirit can express itself through our physical, of course. But everything that the ego identifies with is physical. It's based on a past and dreams of a future. So if you lost everything that makes you who you are as the self, if you lost everything, and I'm not just talking about losing your house and car, I'm talking about everything. Your name, your job, your past, your future, your linear lifestyle, your journey from A to B, your face, your body. Who are you then? And can you be a who? Or are you an it? Because if we go deep into the identity of who you are beyond these things that make you who you are, then it's invalid. You can't really identify with something that cannot be identified. Now you can call it energy, spirit, soul. Of course, sure. But these are also definitions. And for you to have definitions, you need to have understandings of those definitions. So, what would you call yourself? How would you introduce yourself? It's like, hey, I am what? You can't use your name. You can't use your name. You can't use your past. You can't use your family name. What would you identify as? And if, because we do have a lot of spiritual people on this channel, so if you identify as a spirit, you could say, I am one with the universe. I am the spirit. I am all there is. Well, then, I am is invalid because I am needs a self. Think on that for a moment. I am needs a self. A self. A contained self. Your spirit cannot be contained. Your spirit cannot be categorized. It cannot be named. Now, for the sake of language, of course, you have to express yourself in a certain language in order to get close enough to what you mean, in order for you to communicate what you mean. But the self and spirit are not the same thing. The self is fourth dimensional, or fourth dimension, or fourth dimensional is the more accurate way to describe it. The self doesn't have to be seen, but it's still a dense dimension. So if you think about it, and if you try to explain to me who you are still identifying with the self. The ego is still deciding what that is, what you are. And the spirit, for the sake of explaining this, the spirit, the soul, the energy, cannot be explained, cannot be communicated. It can be felt, but it cannot be explained. Because when you try to explain your spirit, you make it into a self. So even when you try to say, I am this type of spirit, or I am that type of spirit, it is actually fourth dimensional. Because when you go higher, you cannot really explain who you are. I can feel your energy. But I wouldn't be able to describe it. Now we can, play that game of warmer or colder, bad or good. But polarity only exists in third dimensional things. Maybe perhaps fourth dimensional. But when you go higher, it does not apply. Good and bad come from the one thing. And I can't even explain what that one thing is. Let's say it's energy. Energy is free from definitions. And so should you. Because your essence is energy. So next time you are saying, I am this or that, remember that is the ego communicating. Now, there is nothing wrong with the ego, because the ego makes things easier for people to connect on a physical level, maybe even on a spiritual level, but that is still involving the ego. If I had to explain how it feels, yeah, again, I'm talking about feelings, you see. So if I had to explain your energy, I would just feel it. Now, feeling is fourth dimensional as well. Feeling. Because as an energy, you don't feel. If you go higher and higher in dimensions, there are no definitions, and there are no emotions, and there is no such thing as soul, spirit, because that is the human language to express what spirit is, or to differentiate between the body and the self and the spirit. The body, the self, and the spirit are separate things in the third dimension or fourth dimension. But the higher you go, there is no such thing as difference. It's all the same. So, who are you? And I guess at this point, my point is made. Because if I ask you, who are you? It's a trap question. I'm not really asking. I am testing you. Because the moment you open your mouth and say, I am this or that, you already tell me that you're not ready for something higher than fourth dimension. So, who are you? Free yourself from those definitions, because those definitions that you put on the self, when we say yourself, we are literally saying yourself. We are pointing at the self. Again, for the sake of language, yes, that can be used for me to communicate in the third dimension. But once we move into a higher frequency, as a collective, we will not need language to communicate. Telepathy is not language, by the way. When you talk to someone telepathically, it is not language that dominates that practice. So, let's say you're practicing telepathy. It is not language that dictates how that telepathy goes. For one, it is the emotion, but for two, the most important part of telepathy is energy. It's energy communication. Now, I was trying to make a point before I kind of talked about telepathy. I can't remember, so it must be not important to mention. But I wanted to say that you need to free yourself from those definitions that you give the self, yourself. Because these definitions actually limit you from ascending, from becoming more. If you are one of those people that doesn't remember names, don't remember dates, don't care about someone's culture. You can be interested in that for sure, but I mean, don't care about people's differences. You don't care about their religion, what country they come from, what language they speak, what day they were born, what their name is, what type of family they come from. Congratulations. You are on that road towards enlightenment. And if you've already reached enlightenment, but somehow you drift back into definitions and you find yourself caring about these things, it's okay. Remember, energy fluctuates. Energy is not one thing. But do remember as well that the more you identify with things, the less you are, the less you are, I would say, in higher dimensions. Can I say it like that? Or the lower you are in frequency. Because the more you identify with things, the lower you are. The less you identify with things, the higher you are. Because the things that we put in categories and in sections, and we are so pressed when it comes to identifying with who we are, what we do, and what we are about. It's if you are trapped in that, then you have more work to do. In fact, let me tell you one thing that will help you with not identifying with the language that kind of goes around when it comes to people. Isolation, hermit mode, whatever you want to call it. The less you are mixing with people, meaning that you socialize, therefore you use the language, therefore you use the language to communicate, meaning that you identify more as the self, more than you don't. So for example, if you are with a group of people, every person in that fucking group is going to be, this is me, blah, blah, blah. Me, you, separation, separation, separation. The more you are content with yourself, the more you have a chance to be with yourself, to isolate, to be in hermit mode. You know, if you are a loner, consider yourself privileged, because it is easier for you to disconnect from what seems to be plaguing the human race, or let's say the ascension of the human race. Because the more people identify with things, the more they keep those identifications alive, the more we are in 3D. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot enjoy the game that humans play. It's fun. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Trust me, I get it. I love it. I love it. But you need to be aware. You need to be aware when you play that game. If you lose yourself, it's funny, you know, yourself. If you lose yourself, then you will not be able to operate in higher dimensions. The less you operate, or the less you identify with the self, the more chances you have to be in higher dimensions and stay there. Because again, energy fluctuates, but the more you practice being in higher dimensions, the more awareness you will have, and the less identity crisis or identification you will have with the self. Because that is the point. You need to remember that you are not the body. You need to remember that you are playing this game, the human game. You need to remember that this is not who you are. What you are doing right now, who you are right now, is not who you are. You've been programmed for the longest time to identify with it, Even your birthdays, every year you celebrate your birthday as if it is who you are. These are the years you've lived. These are the years that you potentially have left. It's all programming. It's all to make you identify with the self, which will keep you trapped in the third dimension. So, the reason why I wanted to talk about this, it's to remind you that you are not who you think you are. Because even if you are someone that is exploring the spiritual realm, you still identify with it. You could call yourself a witch or a warlock or whatever shit, wannabe spiritual beings call themselves. And you need to remember that if you put these definitions on your spiritual journey, you are in fact a fool. Because for you to be spiritual, you can't be identifying with the spiritual definitions. I make fun of it like that so that I can make a point here. Because I'm still using language to kind of deliver this message. I can use telepathy, but hey, not everyone is on that trend right now. So it's easier for me to communicate if I'm using the definitions. So I'm not saying that use these definitions. I'm not telling you what type of language to speak. I'm telling you to be free from language. I'm telling you to be free from the self that you have associated yourself with years after years after years. And even if you change the definitions, you are still finding another definition to suit who you are now. None of it is you. None of it. And that is the point of this recording. I want to remind you that who you think you are is basically a choice that you've made to identify with a self that seems pleasurable, reasonable, something that you feel comfortable to introduce yourself as or introduce yourself with. None of it is really you. You just chose this persona. You chose these definitions. If you remove all of them, who are you then?